Hello, and welcome to the BOFIN Buzz, the podcast for anyone fascinated by farming's future. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the BOFIN Buzz, the first BOFIN Buzz of 2024. And Happy New Year to you as well. Let's hope it's a prosperous one. And I'm delighted today to have Becci Berry with us here on the BOFIN Buzz. Becci, good day. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Well, no, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, this being the first week of January, we have just had the Oxford Farming Conference. Well, what I should point out is that this is being recorded, so we don't know what happened at the conference, but presumably it has all gone well. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about all sorts of farming things and farming interests that we share. Becci, so I just wanted to start by asking you very briefly, what do you think the three key things that you want to set about changing in your farming system, or perhaps you already have changed them in your farming system? What would they be?
Well, it's quite interesting, Tom, because I did start making some changes a few years ago, just looking ahead to the future and trying to think about the way farming might be moving, having two young daughters at the time, thinking about climate change. And so primarily it's about resilience, whether that's business resilience or farming resilience. I'm sure we'll chat about that a bit later.
Yeah.
That's definitely high priority. Secondly is longevity, having the longevity of a farm being a farming enterprise is crucial. And then thirdly, leading into that, it's sort of about the landscape. Most farmers I know are passionate about where they live, how they farm, and the rural landscape around them, and that is what makes us all in the UK such brilliant custodians and managers of the environment around us. And so landscape is probably high up there as well.
No, well, I have to say, I think that's probably three items that I share as well, if I'm honest. So, no, well, that's great. First of all, though, Becci, I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself. I ought to tell everyone, by the way, that we are near neighbours. I mean, I can practically see your farm from where I'm sitting right now. So, describe, where you are, where the farm is, and what the setup is there.
So I farm near you on the Oxfordshire-Wiltshire borders, edge of the Cotswolds, very, very far edge. And we're incredibly lucky because we've got beautiful undulating landscape and a varying landscape, because I farm as a National Trust tenant here at the main home farm. And then I've also got some arable land, which was bought by the family to sort of complement the heavy Denchworth blue clay that we farm here, add some light sandy land sort of just the other side of you. And the whole farming setup, so it would have been third generation farming. Sadly, I wasn't ever intending on being the main farmer. I married a farmer, and sadly, Rich, my late husband, was diagnosed with bowel cancer in his early 30s, which proved terminal. And I had two young children at the time, and we were farming, dairy farming, arable farming. We had quite sort of a sizable number of staff that had all been with the farm for a very long time. And in my infinite naivety, decided that I would take it all on and run the farm, having previously had a background in PR and marketing, but also in the past I was involved in horse racing, and so I did have some sort of land qualifications that I'd done then. But realistically, I'd never intended on being a farmer or had even considered it, if I'm totally honest.
Can I ask you, Becci, looking back on it, was it the right decision?
Oh gosh, definitely. For many reasons, for the stability of the family, for my girls, and also ultimately for me. I mean, a huge learning curve is an understatement. But I guess there's a lot of things that I can now look back and think, well, when I'm talking to other people about certain roles that I have undertaken now and things that I do, I can sort of put my hand on my heart and say, well, you can make changes and you can do things if you put your mind to anything. I remember when Rich was actually still on chemotherapy and was quite poorly, and I was trying to sort of step in with the dairy herd, going out and doing a vet visit, and just hearing all this terminology. Then I was thinking, oh God, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to focus on this? And I was like, right, back to any business person will do the same thing. You strip it back. What do you know and what can you make and change immediately and focus on really to get through. And for me, because of the horse racing background and the equine side, I was able to focus on nutrition and health, and which actually stood me in great stead for the dairy. And then I just had to do course after course after course and do my PA1 and PA2 and sprayer
Right.
courses and things like that. But definitely it's been an amazing journey, and I can definitely stand up there proudly and say, we are all lucky to farm. It's incredibly challenging job that I think a lot of people underestimate, unless you've watched Jeremy Clarkson or something.
Yes.
But we can make changes, and how fortunate is that we literally can be in charge of a lot of other people's destiny as well with what we do.
What are the main changes that have happened at Brimstone Farm then since you started?
Well, firstly, I was able to sort of carry on being third generation, as any farmer that's in a family business will know, is challenging because you have previous generations of decision making that don't necessarily like change and things. And Rich was actually quite forward thinking with a lot of his dairy genetics and his moves toward efficiency. I had a bit of an advantage because I could carry those out without having a lot of the resistance initially that he was and had undergone. So we were able to focus on feed efficiency and health and welfare of the cow. But what that led me on to was looking at breeding the right cow for the system here at Brimstone. And then what that led me on to was on the arable side, looking at what we were doing with the arable rotations and how looking at it as a whole farm, how we could integrate it all. Now, ultimately, after 10 years in dairy and having managed to get the herd to high health status and very efficient and producing, we were sort of 9,500 litres and doing it, half of it from forage, which is sort of the pinnacle, if you like. Moving forward, we needed to make huge investments and changes. We had other succession issues with my father-in-law looking to retire, and there were lots of other challenges which led me to the decision that actually the dairy had sort of come to the end of its life here for the moment, and we have now focused on arable and beef and looking at doing that more regeneratively
Right.
and increasing, ultimately with the same aims that I'd set out with, to be efficient. Profitability at the bottom is the bottom line with all of it. And as much as it's nice to be able to incorporate that with everything, at the end of the day, it's got to be efficient and make money.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've also got involved with some of the BOFIN projects as well, which I'm delighted about, Becci. Just so that everyone knows, Becci is one of our strongest supporters, actually. And we're going to touch on a number of projects. But first of all, the slugs project, which you got involved in right from the very start, actually. So this is, we've got two slugs projects going. Slug resistant wheat is one of them. And this is a very interesting wheat called the Watkins 788, which is believed to be that slugs consistently spurn it, according to trials that have taken place at John Innes Centre. So we came across it at BOFIN. We put the word out there to our members, and loads of you came forward saying that you'd like to try it. We multiplied up the seed on the back of that, and Becci, you were one of the first farmers who stepped forward last year. So just to give everyone some background, we did a year's trials last year. So we compared the Watkins 788 to the farm standard variety. That was not just myself and Becci who did that. It was across a number of farms. I think we had 10 farms in all. But we had no slugs, so we couldn't tell whether there was any difference. It was a really interesting year that came out, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But we're now in the second year of trials. In fact, those trials the monitoring element of those trials is just coming to an end at the moment. So we'll be gathering together the data and finding out whether we really do have a slug-resistant trait in that wheat. But that's one that you've been involved in. You've also got involved in Slimers, which is strategies leading to improved management and enhanced resilience against slugs, which is this is a large DEFRA-funded project that started, £2.6 million project that started in June this year. There are two elements to this. It's about patch location of slugs. So rather than blanket applying slug pellets all over the field, we know that they gather in patches. And so it's about finding exactly where those patches are in your field and then treating just the patches and having the confidence to treat just the patches. Also, another element that's going to be coming up, and I'm going to excite you with some more trials that we're going to be doing in this area, which is autonomous slug control. So this is about robots finding the slugs and then spraying them with nematodes. So completely going away from pellet control altogether. So those are the two. That just gives everyone a bit of a background about slug-resistant wheat and slimers. So first of all, on the slug-resistant wheat, Becci, I mean, why did you want to get involved with this in the first place?
Well, I guess coming back to what we were just talking about earlier, about focusing on things that you can affect change in or learn about to try and make changes. Having come into the industry from sort of slightly outside, I've sort of realised that I did have maybe a different perspective to some people at it. And part of that was just because I was always thinking, well, I don't know anything about that. I'd read about it, try and find out more, and there's this thirst for knowledge just to try and stay afloat. But that sort of has stayed with me. And when it comes to looking here at Brimstone, we're particularly heavy clay. And so quite often farming techniques or varieties and methods are so farm specific, and especially when you're working with flipping heavy wet clay, it makes you sort of think, well, what else can I be looking at? And we have a massive issue with slugs here because they love heavy wet soil. And we've been we were part of the move away from metaldehyde for a long time because we're not that far from the Thames here and a huge river network. And so we'd sort of trialed using ferrous phosphate for many years and seemed to be getting on okay with it. But again, it's another operation you're having to do. It's something else that you're having to be mindful of and watch. And so the idea of having some form of genetics that in wheat that are repelling slugs without having to put any pesticides on it, molluscicides on it, is really appealing. So that's really why, I wanted, and also because the farm here, we've had quite a lot of, over the time, we've had a whole trial site here that we've had for a long time that ADAS ran looking at NVZ and doing stuff. And of course, because of the learning that led on to, because it was on farm, they basically did everything that we were doing on farm at the time. And the value of that was, is immeasurable compared to doing it in lab conditions or under specific site conditions. When you start to implement something and it's a farmer doing it, not a scientist, you have a very different outcome. So I was very keen to get involved because basically, if I can get out and do something, then most people should be able to do it because I'm definitely not that skilled.
Yeah, no, it very much ticks the resilience box as well. I would imagine as well, because I mean, one of the things that strikes me, and one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in this, is that when it comes to slug control in particular, I mean, they are arable farming's biggest pest, and I think the figures suggest that it costs something like £43 million a year for the entire industry. I mean, that's a huge cost, and what's more, only way we can control this pest is with ferric phosphate pellets. There is just
Yeah.
one active ingredient. I don't think there is another pest or pathogen that we deal with where we've only got one thing to deal with it, and I can just see that that's going to disappear uh,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
whatever means, and that's going to be
Well,
it.
and it's the effectiveness, isn't it? This year, doing the trial this year has
Mm,
completely, as you said, last year it was a very
yeah,
dry year, and as fascinating as it was for me, because I learned an awful lot about beetles, and we can come on to that in a minute. But
yeah,
on the back of that, it was a consequential thing to learn about. But this year, because it's so wet, the ferrous phosphate doesn't last. And, we've been applying it when we've been able to travel, if we've been able to travel, which hasn't been to all the fields, and has only been in small pockets. And at that time, the slugs have been sort of in their infancy and not able to eat the pellet. But then I've not been able to get back on to the ground because it's so wet to treat them again by the time they
yeah.
are able to eat the wheat. And by that time, the ferrous phosphate has disappeared. So it's, the efficiency of these things is also questionable, which means that you're constantly looking for something else. And also the variety, having the opportunity to look at varieties like these, which I think are from the Watkins Library, aren't they? Which
Mm.
is fascinating in itself.
Yeah, with the Watkins line, this was apparently a line that was found in Turkmenistan or Turkestan, I think it was. So this was Watkins was a civil servant back in the 1920s who went around collecting wheat samples. I understand. I think he also sent his minions out to collect wheat samples from all around the world. And don't know quite why, but he collected something like 2,000 wheat samples, and when he died, his family gave him to science. And this was a project that I think it was not just John Innocenter. I think there were a number of other RTOs involved in this. They looked in some detail at some of the Watkins lines, and they identified this one, Watkins 788. It's literally the first time it's been grown in the UK. The first time it's been grown for 100 years is in this
Wow.
trial. We're very privileged to have it, and it's quite an extraordinary variety, isn't it? I mean, how's it been? I have to say, by the way, my trial this year, we still haven't managed to get in the ground because we haven't.
We
I'm
were
the only
lucky.
one.
We were very lucky to get it in literally at sort of the last chance saloon when we got it in.
Mm,
And yeah, it is an interesting variety. Last year, um, it sort of managed to tillow out so quickly. I mean, it's quite vigorous, isn't it? I mean, it's the
yeah.
whole point. It's that the yield isn't particularly fantastic, although we didn't do too badly last year considering what our expectations were. Um, but it's a vigorous variety, and that in itself in this day and age is something to be um, grateful for, because
Well, exactly.
this is the thing with doing stuff like this is fascinating, because certain science can help us in many aspects of looking at things, but if we've got varieties that are sort of more broad spectrum and slightly different to the genetics that we're using now, then again, it's coming back to the same old thing of resilience, isn't it?
Well, exactly. Yes. Interesting that, a couple of points that you picked up on there, that it is a very low yielding variety. And one of the things that we did, so we did measure the yield quite closely on a couple of the plots that were grown last year, the ones that we took for seed. And it was about half it was less than half actually of the field average. I think in one instance it was 3.85, and the other one it was 4.14, if I remember off the top of my head. So they are low yielding. Now, interestingly, one of the farms that we took the plot combine through was at Graham Potter up in Yorkshire, and his was very early established. He probably established his a little bit too early, actually, back in middle of September. And it grew like stink, and it grew so fast that actually it got to April, May time, and it already started flopping over. This is an old landrace variety, so it was always going to do that. And he was warned not to plant it too early, not to feed it too much nitrogen, but it flopped over, and he decided to put a topper through half of it. And you can imagine, I mean, this is a scientific trial, and he just takes a topper through half of it, which I think is just brilliant. All the scientists were aghast at what he'd done, but really, really interesting in terms of how it grew back. Bearing in mind this was May, and it was already beginning to set ear, I think, and it grew back, and it actually it stood better than the other patch where he hadn't topped it. And I might say the yield was not that far different. It was lower, but it was not. It was only about 10 to 20% lower in the bit that he had topped. So that just shows you how this variety grows. So even despite its, relevant to its slug-resistant charms or whatever, this is obviously a variety that grows like stink. So there's something interesting in it anyway that we would never have known about if we hadn't been in this trial.
Exactly. If we hadn't have done it and done it across so many different farms, and that's the interesting thing about this project, isn't it? Is it's not just about one farm or one particular area. It's different systems, different farms, and different soil types.
Yeah. No. Well, now the interesting thing about this, by the way, is because don't worry, we're not expecting to put Watkins 788 on the market as slug-resistant wheat, because no one would buy it because it doesn't yield and it flops all over the place, as we said. But what they have done, those clever people at John Innes Centre, has crossed it into a modern wheat, Paragon, and so we've got, I think it's 84 recombinant inbred lines. That they're currently testing and seeing which of them have got this apparent slug-resistant trait. So I can reveal, by the way, Becci, because I caught up with Victor at the lab the other day, so they've been testing. They've retested Watkins 788, and that's again coming out consistently spurned by slugs. Quite a few of the others are as well, so. Which is interesting. And I don't think there are any that, I mean, they've only done initial screens, and Victor's a scientist, and so he counters it with all sorts of caution and so on and so forth. But we don't think that there's anything that's performing better than the Watkins 788, but certainly comparable to. And hopefully we're going to have some of that material that will be available for a trial next autumn. So hopefully, I do hope you'll help us with that one.
Definitely.
And now the other trial that you've been involved in is our Slimers trial and the patch location with that. Now, the idea of this is you have a hectare within your field, and you have 100 slug traps within that hectare grid that you've had to look after.
Yes,
and
Tom.
so just tell me how that went.
Well, my view of a scientist is slightly different now to what it was, because in an ordinary year, I think it maybe wouldn't have been as arduous as it is this year, because it's so flipping wet. I have put some of the photographs and things on. I mean, there's been areas which is just poddling across every time. So it takes quite a while to sort of track across and have a look at all the traps and monitor it. But it is quite interesting, because there are some, I hope my data shows there are some patterns as to the areas where there are more slugs. And then in amongst that, we've been doing the beetle pits.
Yes,
as well.
That's right. Now this is something that is really interesting, actually. So this was something that I think you came across. Well, we all did last year. So last year in the trials, as I say, we found no slugs basically, but all of us did find quite a few beetles, and yourself included. You found some quite extraordinary ones as well.
It was the size of the beetles, and also there were lots of them, and because it was so dry, there were hardly any slugs around. Well, there weren't any, but there was this huge number of beetles around, and they were the coach death beetles, which are quite big. And then when we were having a conversation about it at a meeting with other BOFIN farmers, the entomologist said, "Oh well, yes, because the beetles eat the slugs, and so it's really good to have that for beetles." We went, "What? They eat the slugs? That's fantastic!" And also because it was warmer, there was a higher percentage of those beetles around at the time that we were sowing the wheat, which is would normally be unusual, because usually it's like this year it's more cold and wet and the beetles have disappeared predominantly. Although, having done this trial and we did the pitfall traps, I was astounded how many beetles we have found in there. But
Yeah.
different varieties, that's the thing, isn't it? It's, the big ones definitely have disappeared sooner than
Right.
the other ones.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I mean, just to fill people in, so it was on the back of last year's trial and your interest, particular, Becci, but also the other farmers who are interested in it, that this year, within the Slimers trial, we introduced a beetle monitoring program. And we're working with Kelly Jowett from Rothamsted, who is, I think she's one of the sort of leading authorities on beetles, actually. And she's got a really good a system, protocol for people to follow if they want to monitor their beetles, and it's a trap that sits in the ground, and you can get this. There's details about the actual trap itself. If you have a look on the BOFIN website, you'll find some details on there. But so we came up with a.
Also did this, Tom.
Oh,
Which
yes.
was fascinating, the identification guide that she did, because
That's right. Yeah. So for those listening rather than watching, Becci's just been holding up the Farmland Caribid. What was the title again? Farmland.
Farmland Caribid Identification Guide.
Yes. So that's a document that's available from Rothamsted, written by Kelly, and it gives you chapter and verse on how to monitor your beetles. Really, really good guide, and it's got loads of really good illustrations of the beetles. And I know that. So I think we had 7 of our farmers who had the beetle traps. Now, having said that, one of those farmers is me, and I still haven't established my trial yet, obviously. And another one was Hannah Darby in Cambridgeshire, and sadly, her trial, the wheat just didn't come, and so we've had to pull out of her trial. Hopefully, we're going to re-establish it in the spring, but obviously that meant the beetles went as well. But just to give me some, so you were monitoring 20 beetle traps, I think, weren't you, Becci?
Yeah.
Just tell us about that.
Well, so it's interesting to see. It did sort of follow that pattern that we had. I mean, the first couple of weeks where we were monitoring them, there was an astounding number of beetles in there. It was quite, I mean, some of the pitfall traps, it's only a small paper cup that's sort of in the ground. And when you tipped it out, I think we had 20 or 25 in some of
Wow.
the traps. And as time has gone on, they have diminished, but there are still quite a number of the smaller beetles rather than the big coach death beetles. But I haven't seen. It'd be interesting to see when the data comes back, when you're logging, to see if there's any pattern to beetle numbers to slug numbers across the plot as well.
Well, exactly, and that's what we're looking to find out, because, as you say, beetles are a predator of slugs, and the question is just how much of a predator are they? What sort of impact do they have on slug populations? So hopefully, from the data that we get through, we can relate the slug populations to the beetle populations, and see if there are any correlations in how they, perhaps affect the numbers. And then, if it is has a sizable impact, then perhaps we should be looking a little bit more closely on what we can do to encourage beetle populations in order to help with the slug control.
And it's the other fascinating thing that I've found, the number of worms and the variety of worms that we've had as well, have been phenomenal. I mean, sadly, I've drowned quite a lot in the beetle pitfall traps, which was a concern. Every time I empty them out and I get a few worms, I sort of have a little moment of sadness. But you see all the worm castings and things, and it just, it does highlight, and it sort of comes back to this thing with farming about how, we do make such a difference with our ecosystems, and there is often a whole discussion about doom and gloom and things, and actually, when you start looking at it in detail and looking at our farms from a slightly different perspective, there's a lot of of good, and there's a lot of, there's a huge ecosystem out there that we're supporting, that
Mm.
really needs to be, shouted about, because actually there is an enormous amount of biodiversity that is enabled by arable farming. It's not all just doom and gloom.
Well, that leads me very nicely onto the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was the AMF project that you've been involved in. So this is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So this is work that we've and regular listeners of the podcast will have heard me talk about this for a while. So apologies to you if I'm repeating what you already know. But so this is work that's been led by Tom Thurkel at the Crop Science Centre in Cambridge. And he's been looking at mycorrhizal communities. It's part of a larger project looking at the potential for wheat that can fix its own nitrogen. And they've looking at the plant signaling pathways. That's why he's looking in detail at mycorrhizal fungi. It's a relationship that goes back 460 million years, one of the oldest relationships in symbiotic relationships in nature that plants have with this fungi. Now, they've been doing some trials in Cambridge, but what Tom was interested to know is how it varies across arable soils. So we put the word out to BOFIN members, and you stepped up to the plate. We had 72 people who received samples. 41 of them we received back. One of them was yours, Becci, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the interesting things about the results of this, so there was a specific way that you had to measure the mycorrhizal, sample the roots. One of the interesting things was that, so we sent out detailed guidance on this, and everyone did it correctly, dug it up correctly, prepared the roots correctly, sent them in. Tom said he had perfect samples. So first of all,
Which is amazing,
congratulations.
because I did wonder what the earth we were doing. I was sat out on the table in the garden washing roots off of wheat plants.
Yeah, well, I mean, did it take you very long to
No,
do
it
it?
didn't. It was just, I guess it's something, it's like anything when you do it for the first time. If you don't know what you're doing, it just, you're trying to be careful and to make sure that you follow the protocol and do it correctly.
Well, you did, and so did everyone else, which was brilliant. And now the results are back, and they are available again. If you have a look on the website, then you'll find them there. But the main finding that we had was an enormous spread. So right from 6% mycorrhizal fungi within the root to almost 70%. A massive spread. Now, the interesting thing is that we asked everybody what sort of farming system they had, what sort of cultivation system, and there are some correlations. So, for example, now interestingly enough, it was actually the ploughed samples that had the highest out of all the
Yeah.
cultivation ones, but we only had 4 ploughed samples, and 3 of them were organic. So I think we can probably discount that. The highest otherwise was the direct drilled, as you might expect. Then shallow tilled and deep non-inversion tillage was the poorest as far as that was concerned, which is something I think that you'd expect. What sort of system have you got, by the way?
Well, so we're really mixed. So we are sort of slowly, with my mind of resilience and things, and looking at sort of more regenerative practices. I've always been trying to look at extending crop rotations and rotations around the farm. So the particular field that I took that wheat from had actually been direct drilled into what was previously a grassland paddock. And so, just from my own fascination, that was to see what the fungal
Hmm.
activity was on roots like that, as opposed to some samples that would be maybe come from purely arable farming. But we have moved towards minimum tillage where we can. However, I'm still, I think there is a place for skills and, ploughing done well at
Hmm.
the right time as part of our toolbox is still an essential part. And so after certain crops, we have do some shallow ploughing if the conditions are right and if it's the right thing to do. So,
Yeah.
and for me, that's always going to be the case. And I really hope that we preserve these skills because I think they are skills, and they're things that we all need in our toolbox. And if you move away from a system and all go to one system and all do one thing, at some point in time, it's going to bite someone in the bum, because as we've just alluded to in our conversation, we all farm different types of farm, and we all manage different types of soils, landscape, and other challenges around it. So
Well, it's
it's a
interesting.
mix.
It's interesting you say that, Becky, because now I've been talking to some people about the results, and one of the things that's a view that's come back. I mean, I have no science to back this up, but if you occasionally plough, then yes, you obviously do quite a lot of disturbance to the mycorrhizal fungi in that zone that you plough. But if you've got a good, healthy soil, the mycorrhizal will still be beneath the plough pan. It will still be within the soil that you disturbed, even though you disturbed it. So it will bounce back quickly if you've got a good, healthy soil. And the mycorrhizal, I mean, I don't think you can draw too many conclusions from our 4 results, but they were exceptionally. As I say, they're organic systems. And by the way, that was the other aspect about this. So we asked people whether they were organic, regenerative, or conventional. Now, obviously, regenerative is a very broad church, and this is but they're farmers' own views of whether they're regenerative. Now, the interesting thing was organic was top. We'll give that to the organic guys. I'm afraid we only had 3 organic farmers though, so it's not particularly reliable data. Regenerative by far the next best. So those farmers who said they were regenerative, and indeed, if you look at some of the individual results, some of the regenerative farmers were right at the very top, at that sort of 70% level. So regen farming, you can say what you like about regen. It does appear to give the results, especially when it comes to our muscular mycorrhizal fungi.
It's a mindset, isn't it? I've talked about this on the sort of beef side, on the grazing system. It's each, coming back to this thing that each farm is different, and it's about doing the right thing for your land and farm at that time, but with a longer term approach. It's not just about one particular crop that year necessarily. It's looking at in the bigger picture of things.
Now, I'm sure everyone's probably dying to know how you did, Becky. Are you okay to share the results?
Absolutely fine.
Well, now I think so. I think your percentage was 28%, as far as I can gather from this. So,
we were sort of middle of the road, I think, weren't we? We were middle of the road, really, which is interesting. And as we were having a discussion earlier as well, it opens more questions, asks more questions than necessarily that it answers at the moment. For me, does variety come into it? Does other system approaches come into it? Because certainly some people who would be planting organic seed or in a regenerative system maybe have got different varieties, and maybe some of the more modern commercial varieties like the one that we grew. I think we had Skyfall up on that particular plot. Have we bred out certain things that actually we should be thinking more about? And if definitely, if fungal activity is going to enhance the whole system, maybe we should be looking at it in a different way.
Yeah, well, I have to say you did better than I did, Becky, because I was languishing below 20%. In fact, I think I was below 15%.
We've got very different soils, and our farms have been farmed. I'm fortunate here. We've always been mixed farming, and I'm a huge advocate for mixed farming, because I do think that it gives you the opportunity to add things in and to boost, fungal activity in the soil.
Well, exactly. Yeah, really. And the other interesting thing about mine is that it was triticale rather than wheat, actually, which was different from all the other varieties. So we asked people to send in by preference X Days and Skyfall. I didn't happen to have any wheat last year, so I sent in triticale. And now I thought the association between triticale and mycorrhizal fungi would be huge because it's a huge rooter.
Mm,
It's a voracious rooter,
mm.
triticale. But actually, by that very fact, that probably means it doesn't have great association, because one thing I've learned about mycorrhizal fungi is that it's up to the plant whether it switches on this activity or not. And so if the plant doesn't think it needs it, then it won't switch it on. Now, so if it's a plant like triticale, where it's got a very effective rooting system, then it won't make that association as much as perhaps a wheat does. Interestingly enough, by the way, we also sampled some KWS patches. So KWS very kindly supported the survey, and we sampled their variety plots. And X days, for example, was up near 50%, whereas palladium was down near 25%. And the way Tom explains it is he says that palladium doesn't think it needs AMF as much as X days does. So interesting thought there.
It is
But it opens up a whole new realm, I think. And again, another project that I hope you're going to get involved in, Becci. So starting in the new year is Truth, which is thriving roots underpinning total soil health. So it basically builds on this project and looks at the relationship between plants and soil microbes. So we're working with PES technology, really exciting technology. It's a soil nose. So what it does is it sniffs the volatiles in the soil, and it can tell from that what sort of life you've got in the soil, what microbes, what bacteria, and things like that. So they've got it to proof of concept. One of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be supplying these PES sensors to our farmers and developing its capability better. We are also working with University of Nottingham with this. They're going to be bringing some really interesting tech into the soils, into the farmers who will be involved in into on-farm trials, to have a look at what's going on beneath the soil, and specifically the relationship between the roots and the soil microbial community.
absolutely
And coming up,
fascinating, and it's definitely
mm,
going to have to be the way that we're looking forward, isn't it?
absolutely. Well, we're really excited about this project, and I hope you will be too,
Mm.
Becci, when we start at the beginning of January. So look out for more on that. We've also got John Innes Centre, and some people may know their Wish Roots program, where they're looking at the varieties that have an interesting rooting structure. It's something we've never really looked at in the past. We know so much about what's growing above the ground, but we know very little about what's
I
actually
think
going
again
on
that's
below.
something really that we should be very proud of as farmers, because
Mm,
if you look through history of time, we've been asked to produce food and to do it efficiently and produce huge volumes, and we've proven that we can do that here in the UK very well. And now we've got sort of almost a fortunate time where we can sort of take a step back and look at how we can do it better. And in a more environmentally friendly way, and all of these
mm.
projects lead into that, don't they? Um,
No, absolutely. Now that leads me very easily into the next your next sort of priority area, which is longevity. So when you say longevity, what do you mean by that, Becci?
I think we have to remember where we are in the world, and in the UK, we're in a temperate climate. We're very good at producing food, and we're very able to do it. We've also got a beautiful landscape, and a lot of people come and out to the countryside, love walking and looking at the mosaic that we create. And I would be really, I am passionate about preserving that, and looking at how we pursue that. So as a business, we have to have, as well as the resilience, be able to have that longevity. And so that means about looking into things in the future. And what I was talking about earlier with the skill set,
Mm,
and not losing skills is comes into that whole theme as well, which led me. I was very fortunate to be asked if I'd sit on the as a on the board of a new organisation that's been sort of set up called the Institute of Agriculture and Horticulture, TIA, which has been sort of created to sort of act as almost an umbrella organisation. My own experience of coming into farming I was very fortunate. We're in an area where we've got, great farmers like yourself and people that are willing to share knowledge and knowledge exchange and skills and support each other through learning. But not everywhere in the country is like that, and not everyone is able to do that. And therefore, if you're trying to find courses or where to go for information, at the moment there's lots of people that do great jobs, but trying to find it if you're from outside the industry can be quite challenging. And also, we've not been very good at career pathways in agriculture, coming in at certain levels and nurturing people all the way through. And so TIA has really been sort of set up with initially from funding from DEFRA, but as an organisation to sort of help breach that gap and sort of pull people together and act as sort of a landing platform, if you like, to sort of help professionalise the industry and bring it all together and support people.
Yeah. So if you're, I mean, what specifically does TIA help people with? I mean, I can imagine, is it for the person who's sort of looking to get into agriculture, or perhaps in agriculture and looking to develop their career path, their skills?
Everything, Tom.
So,
Everything.
yeah.
From one of the things that we've got bad press for, as an industry, is in schools. People talk down about farming, and it's never really given as a career opportunity to a lot of people, mainly because people don't understand. If I think of the roles that we've had to learn and develop, just for me being on farm, one day it's agronomy, one day it's HR, one day it's banking and looking at the financial side of it and doing accounting, and all of those skills that you need are vast, really. And there are very few jobs and careers that you need that breadth. So to get information on all of that can be a minefield. So, TIA's helping people through that, and it's about continual professional development, regardless at what level you're at, but also understanding what roles and jobs and opportunities there are. So it's hoping to sort of create a platform where that's available to everybody.
I see, and I mean, bearing in mind that, of course, this is the BOFIN Buzz podcast audience, so we're talking to the most progressive, forward-thinking farmers here. Obviously, will be among the audience. A lot of them will be thinking, well, that's all very well, but actually, I think I've got a lot to offer here in terms of helping others progress their pathways. And so, if you want to get involved with some of these initiatives, if you're someone who feels that they can offer something, what opportunities are there?
Watch this space, because TIA is officially launching in the new year, so it's not actually launched as yet. And there will be opportunities, yes. And there are, we're all constantly learning, and there's always some form of CPD that we can be doing and we have to do within the industry. And so that's sort of the primary focus, but there will be other opportunities, so just watch this space.
Great. Well, yeah, absolutely. Watch this space. And moving on, because we've been rattling on for ages. So, but I'm very keen to talk about your last the element that you brought up was legacy and landscape. So what do you mean by that, Becci?
Well, again, coming back to my personal experience, I'm a National Trust tenant here, but I've been fortunate to be on an estate that had some very forward-thinking people involved during its history. So even back in 1754, the foundations of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries was the Ministry of Ag, which was sort of set up as a board by some key members and some local people around here who were involved with the estate here. And really, the landscape here has been evolved through very forward-thinking people. I mean, we're not far from the River Thames. So Robert Campbell, who was previously at Buscott Park, he installed a railway so that there was a private railway system that could take cheese and milk from the dairy down to the river, and then it could, they had a distillery there. They could take it up to London. There was a whole. When we talk about sustainable, they were trying to really create a whole sustainable system here. But it's left a wonderful legacy of a beautiful farmland and landscape all around us. And we are not that far from London, a commutable distance, and we have got a lot of other industries around us. So there's a massive amount of demand for development, for housing, and more commercial side of it. And I think we've got a huge place to play as farmers to make sure that we support that with the landscape and how we manage that.
Yes, and I mean, one of the ways that farmers have been doing that nationally, I mean, it's very difficult to make an influence yourself as an individual farmer, but farmers have been gathering together in clusters, and that's one of the
Yep.
things that we've seen recently, and it's been very much encouraged by DEFRA and various schemes. So we locally have got the OC Catchment Farmer Cluster, which you're part of, and I actually chair for my sins. It has to be said. I mean, the interesting thing about this is that it's something that we've been trying to get underway for years, and whenever we try, we've often got together in meetings and things, and someone has come along to the Freshwater Habitats Trust has been supporting us along the way, which has been great, and we've had support from Thames Water as well. And what we found with the cluster is that by coming together as a group of farmers, then we've been able to leverage money not just from Thames Water, but also from DEFRA and farming and farming in protected
Protected
landscapes.
landscapes, yeah.
Yeah, we've got some money hopefully coming from that, and we've been also successful. We've joined together with the Next Door cluster, and we put in for a landscape recovery bid, which we have won. We're one of the successful farm clusters, and I mean most of the work has been done by the wonderful Adam Bowes, who's the
Facilitator.
Freshwater Habitats Trust. So we ought to give him credit. He's
Definitely.
done virtually all of the work, actually, if I'm honest,
Mm.
especially all of the ghastly form filling and
I was going to say,
paperwork
well,
that has to be done.
it's a huge skill, isn't it?
Yeah.
Writing bid reports and things, and pulling it all together. And when we discuss stuff, and Adam said, "Oh yeah, that's great," and goes off and writes it up, it's fantastic.
No, absolutely. So, well, look, gosh, the time is rattling on. Thank you very much for your time, by the way,
You're very
Becky.
welcome. We've covered a wide range of subjects, Tom.
We have indeed. No, I just wanted to sort of, bring it to a close. But first of all, where do you think this is all going? You talked about resilience, you talked about longevity and legacy and landscape. These are all really long term things. So, where are we going? What's your sort of ideal of where you think farming should be heading?
Well, gosh, heaven knows. All I will say is I know this is going to be going out just after Oxford Farming Conference, and I'm sure there'll be some fascinating things that we'll have heard on policy and direction. But for you and I, just had the COP28, which has been quite controversial in itself. And there's things out of that which I think are fascinating. The fact that India will not sign up to certain things because they value their food security too highly. And, that's something that we come back to and we've just got to be mindful of. So without getting too political about it all, I think where is it it's heading? We're definitely, we are change. I mean, look at where we started talking in 2018, 2019 about elms. And the changes it was going to bring, and everybody was very sceptical. But we're already there. People are changing their farming practices. SFI and the likes that have created opportunities to look at things alternatively. And if we really want to be resilient and to continue being profitable, we've got to make sure that people recognise what we're doing on a wider scale, and being involved in things, understanding more about the fungal activity and the biodiversity that's sort of going alongside with what we're doing, and celebrating it is really a huge win for me, because I think that is going to secure our longevity, and also it entice people into it. It's an exciting time for youngsters to get involved and for people to come on board, because there's so many different layers to agriculture now. On that side, it's not just sitting on a tractor. In old terms, or the old image we have of people farming, it is it's hugely skilled, but it's a huge array of jobs, and there are many layers, and it's not all down to one person. It's a teamwork, and I think that's a great thing for the industry moving forward.
No, I'd echo that, Becky. I think and actually the skill set. You talked earlier on about this massive skill set that you need as a farmer. I think if anything, it's likely to get broader.
Yeah,
Especially as we bring in things like robotics and other things. But by that very nature, we're bringing other people into farming, which I think is
absolutely.
fantastic, and other skills as well are being involved in farming. And I think one of the elements that, and you touched on it, this element of food security. I think, perhaps we have been quite focused in recent years since Brexit and so on the elms aspect and the landscape aspects that you talked about earlier. But the food security aspect, I think, is coming back into the political focus now, and it's largely the work that the NFU has successfully done. But I think the government's coming around to that way of thinking as well, and I think society generally. And you touched on COP28, where it has been sort of quite an important
Yeah, and
issue at
diets
COP28.
changing, dramatically. They've changed, over the last 30 or 40 years, and Henry Dimbleby's national food strategy is still a very underrated document in my eyes, because that sort of did look at the broad picture of how we the changes that having a good nutritional food system and what that can bring. And leading it back to sort of what we're doing with BOFIN about looking at varieties and resilience in crops. It all links into that, providing nutritional food without as many inputs as we can, really.
No, absolutely. Well, I sincerely hope that's what we're doing at Boffin. And look, that's all we've got time for. And we could go on all afternoon, couldn't we, Becky? But
I'm sure everyone's had
well,
enough.
thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all of your views and for sharing so much with us as well. As I said, look out for those exciting projects that we've got coming up this year, should I say, because we are now in 2024. And I'd say that to everyone as well. Look out for updates from BOFIN. We've got some really exciting projects coming up. We've touched on a few today, and there are more in the pipeline as well. So watch this space. Look out to get involved. And it's an exciting time for agriculture, and it's an exciting time for innovation as well. There's some really exciting moves on the innovation front. So listen, that's all we've got time for. Thank you again, Becky, for your time and for joining us today on the BOFIN Buzz. And join us again for the next episode of the BOFIN Buzz. Thank you very much, and goodbye.